Welcome, everybody. Hope your day is off to a good start. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Great. Well, Mrs. Walker, thanks for organizing such a wonderful program for us this morning. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Excellent. Good morning, everybody. I'm pleased to welcome you all to Worcester Academy's Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. MLK is honored with a national holiday in his name, slated for this coming Monday, January 18th. In the next 50 minutes, I will begin by sharing Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy with some commentary. I ask anyone who wants to share your responses again about social and racial justice to post them in the chat in real time as we continue on with the program. After this segment, Mr. Sina will share some thoughts, followed by Gaurav Savant on behalf of SOG. Finally, I will welcome our keynote closing speaker, National Slam Poet Champion Andre Bradford, and Mrs. Surgeon Richards will close the program with a few reminders before you transition to advisory or the next thing that's on your schedule. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia on January 15th, 1929. He achieved and advocated for many things, including social and racial justice, and was a pivotal advocate for African Americans during the civil rights movement in the United States. A few interests and fun facts about MLK include that he skipped 2 grades in high school, 9th and 11th grade, and entered college, Morehouse College, at the age of 15 in 1944. By 19, he received a bachelor's degree in sociology. Another fact, his house was once bombed. I'm sure you've heard of this. This was during the Montgomery bus boycott, which lasted 385 days. His autopsy revealed that stress had taken a major toll on his body with his life work of activism. Despite being only 39 when he passed away, one of his doctors noted that he had the heart of a 60-year-old. Today, over 700 streets in the United States are named after Martin Luther King Jr. There is one such street in almost every major city across the country, including Worcester, Massachusetts. George Washington and Abraham Lincoln are the only other Americans to have their birthdays observed as a national holiday, now combined as President's Day. King championed social political change through nonviolence and helped shape the world we live in today. His dedication to equality continues to inspire us. All said, it bears noting that the concept of his nonviolence has been distorted and somewhat flattened. Certainly, King was a minister and an intellectual who believed in nonviolence as a personal philosophy against doing harm to other human beings. And he extended his belief to a strategy of nonviolence in direct action to affect social change. And his nonviolent resistance never meant private abandonment of self-defense, nor conversion to pacifism. King was not one-dimensional. In fact, he stirred great controversy and opposition because he was not one-dimensional, which made him a threat and ultimately ended his life. King saw nonviolent direct action as a means of protesters presenting their bodies as an appeal to the conscience of the larger society in an effort to create a beloved community, as he called it. His rhetoric performed the role of narration and monologue that heightened the drama between oppressed and oppressor. He was adamant that his nonviolence did not constitute passivity or mollification, but rather a militant commitment to change. What about his strategic grassroots organizing of boycotts and freedom rides? He certainly did not commit future activists to passivity. Think about our contemporary civil and racial justice heroes, such as DeRoy McKesson, civil rights activist, podcaster, and former school administrator. An early supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement, he has been active in the protests of Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore, and on social media outlets such as Twitter and Instagram. Pastor Raphael Warnock will be Georgia's first Black senator and the second Black senator to represent the South since Reconstruction. King Janey has represented District 7 on the Boston City Council since January 2018, is now poised to become Boston's first Black woman mayor. The most familiar and readily cited example of Black activism directly in King's tradition is the Black Lives Matter organization, a key part of the Black liberation movement that came to being in 2013 through the activists Alicia Garza, Patrice Concolors, and Opal Tometi. The organization readily acknowledges, even embraces, the similarities between it and the civil rights movement. 54 years ago, on April 4th, 1967, at Riverside Church in New York City, Martin Luther King delivered his powerful and most controversial speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence. Knowing the intense criticism he would receive for speaking out, he spoke, quote, "I'm here tonight because my conscience leaves me no other choice." He spoke against war and its crippling effects on social progress. He denounced the death and destruction in Vietnam and the waste of billions on an immoral war, and connected the inherent racism of killing the Vietnamese people with the killing of Black people in America through dehumanization and contempt for other people. In his speech, he asked us to reassess our values, to avoid future mistakes that could destroy our nation. As we continue to process and reflect on the current social political climate, the events of our nation, and most pointedly, the attack on Capitol Hill, many will agree that King's messages were not heeded and our problems have multiplied. MLK challenged us to do better. He said, quote, "We still have a choice today, nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. If we do not act, we shall be dragged down the long, dark, and shameful corridors of time reserved for those who possess power without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight. Now let us begin. Now let us rededicate ourselves to the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for a new world. The choice is ours," he says, "and though we might prefer it otherwise, we must choose in this crucial moment of human history." King words ring true today, and we can no longer engage in a future dream, something that many folks do after reading and hearing his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, but never get below the surface of it. King said in his letter from Birmingham jail, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And it may be true that the law can't make a man love me, but it can restrain him from lynching me. And I think that's pretty important also. In his speech known as The Other America, he mentions the word love twice and never once refers to his dream. So I ask you, how do we commit to a better tomorrow? Right now, right here in our own community at Worcester Academy. What can we do today to create social and racial justice? What can we do in our school, in our city, in our towns, in our homes? King experienced racism from an early age, and those events stayed with him and eventually brought him to a life of activism. Where is the activism in you? King gave hundreds of moving speeches across the country, and in 1964 was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. On April 4th, 1968, Dr. King was shot and killed while in Memphis, Tennessee. Although his life ended that day, the work that he had accomplished changed the nation. At this time, I'm going to read again the WA questions for MLK Day that are posted in the chat. Please feel free to engage the questions with your responses by typing them in as we continue through the program. What does social justice mean to you? What does racial justice look like to you, and how does it show up in our community at Worcester Academy? How can I get more involved with social and or racial justice issues in school and beyond? So I'll leave you with a DEI question dialogue that I found by Dafina Lazarus Stewart, Professor of Higher Education and Student Affairs at Bowling Green State University. Stewart researches diversity, equity, and justice in higher education, particularly focused on student experiences, outcomes, and institutional transformation. And the dialogue box says the following. Diversity asks, who's in the room? Equity responds, who is trying to get in the room but can't? Whose presence in the room is under constant threat of erasure? Inclusion asks, have everyone's ideas been heard? Justice responds, whose ideas won't be taken as seriously because they aren't in the majority. Diversity asks, how many more of, pick any minoritized identity, group do we have this year than last year? Equity responds, what conditions have been created that maintain certain groups as the perpetual majority? Inclusion asks, is this environment safe for everybody to feel like they belong? And finally, justice challenges, whose safety is being sacrificed and minimized to allow others to be comfortable maintaining dehumanizing views? And with that, I'm going to turn the program now over to our head of school, Mr. Sino.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Walker, for your remarks and also for the quick introduction here, and as well as the reiterate Ms. Surgeon Richards' comments about your efforts in organizing today's program. Some of you might remember last year, those of you who were with us, I spent some time expressing appreciation for the people who've been part of my education over the years, been part of supporting my growth and my exploration. And so without getting into detail about that, I will say thank you to all of those unnamed people right now, many of whom, frankly, are probably on this Zoom call with us, because I'm always grateful for being at Worcester Academy, where I have the chance to learn from my colleagues and from students every day, even from a distance, even in remote times. I think a lot about the lessons that I gather from just engaging in conversation with people. I had one of those engaging conversations and learning moments just this week. I called a friend who's a Worcester Academy alumnus and has had a legacy of working in civil rights, working for social justice causes alongside what he does for his profession. And, I called with a specific purpose, but I ended up with one of these lengthy, nearly hour and a half long conversations where I learned a lot more than I expected to learn. I reflected a lot more than I expected to reflect on current events. And one of the gifts that I received was just to hear some perspective outside of my own. And so I encourage all of you, as you think about, what does racial justice look like to you at Worcester Academy? How can I get more involved? It starts with conversations. It starts with learning. And I think it's really important not to be afraid to talk about it, or to at least acknowledge your fear of making a mistake, or saying the wrong thing, or maybe even upsetting somebody in some other way with a strong conviction that you have. But I think it's important that you engage in these conversations and you make them part of your regular dialogue and your regular learning process. This friend was talking a little bit about what he sees as the irony in this country celebrating Dr. King and celebrating his birthday as a national holiday. And the irony is not about whether Dr. King is worthy of celebration or his legacy is worthy of celebration. That's clear and undeniable. The irony comes from his reflection on the fact that so many people actually hated Dr. King. Here's a man who led with strength and love and a desire to challenge the world as it was, and to bring people to a better place. And he was confronted regularly with hate. He was confronted with hate by average citizens. He was confronted with hate from people who held elected office. He was spied on. Narratives were created about him to discredit him in some cases. And ultimately, the people who hated him ended up killing him, in addition to the toll that they took on his day-to-day life as he tried to lead our country forward and lead the world forward. And so I think, if you think about what could have happened, right? What happens if someone like Dr. King lives longer and his legacy is extended through his life, not just through our memories of his life? If you think about all the other things that were happening in the world at that time, there were other assassinations, there were other challenges to the status quo in society through the civil rights movement, and the ways in which those were met with resistance. And so I look at what is happening in our world now, I look at our history in the United States, and I like to think of history as many of you do, and as many of our teachers like to share it in their classrooms in strands. And two of the strands that I think are present throughout US history are challenges around race and violence. They don't always converge together in the public consciousness, but they're often tied together if you go back and you look at our history as a country. But you think about what's happened in the last year and the ways in which violence and race have converged in our public consciousness and society. And you look at the ways in which they converged in Washington, D.C. In the last week or so, and you look at the ways in which, frankly, mostly it was white people, right, violently expressing their rage and the hate and feeling anger at feeling disenfranchised, taking steps to desecrate our democracy, to threaten our democratic process and our elected officials. Allegedly now there's more violence planned at state capitals throughout the country between now and the inauguration, and perhaps on inauguration day itself. And you have to ask yourself, what are people reacting to right now? Where does this disenfranchisement come from? Who do they feel is taking their place? Is a place of privilege, perhaps, but who do they feel is taking their place over, and who's claiming ownership over what they hold dear? Some of you might discover answers to those questions today, or start to think about them a little bit more deeply. Perhaps that will come in the future. Some of you may have well-formed ideas, and you can continue to explore those. But either way, obviously we want to keep learning together about what's happened, what is happening, and what we can expect to happen moving forward. And that's part of the educational process that I think we all need to engage as we go through. Last year, I shared a story with you that was connects Worcester Academy to Dr. King. And I want to share that story again, because I'm sure many of us have forgotten it, or at least forgotten the details of it. And some of us haven't heard it yet. And so I want to make sure to do that. The story I'll read to you from the commencement remarks by a man named Ernest Green. Ernest Green spoke at Worcester Academy's commencement in 2006. He was the friend of one of our trustees at the time, a gentleman named Neil McCabe, who's since passed away. But Ernest Green was, as a young man, was asked by NAACP President Daisy Bates to be one of the group of Black students that helped desegregate schools and help challenge the law of the land and the practices in education. And so he was one of the Little Rock Nine, the students that confronted hate and resistance and enrolled at Little Rock Central High School in Arkansas. And that was part of the value in having him come and speak about that experience. I won't share that part of his story today, but I want to tell you this other story that connects us to Worcester Academy and Dr. King. He said, I learned something new about a story I've known for a long time on your website. It's about a Black man in Atlanta, Georgia, who about 80 years ago, that was 80 at the time, it's almost 100 now, 80 years ago decided he needed to go to college. He wanted to be a minister. He could preach, but he could barely read. Even though he was already an adult, he taught himself to read and write, but not well enough. When he took the admission tests for the local college, the registrar handed him the results and said coldly, "Look, you're just not college material." He'd failed them all. He could have given up. Instead, he walked out, marched past the secretary into the office of the college president, and poured out his heart. He talked about how much he wanted an education. He talked about how hard he'd tried. "Give me a chance," he said. The president just listened. Finally, the man gave up. He walked out in despair. But as he was leaving the campus, the secretary came running up. She held out a note. "Take this to the registrar," she said. And soon a disgusted registrar was reading a note ordering him to admit to Morehouse College in Atlanta, Michael King, this man who would graduate, become a great minister, and have a son we know as Martin Luther King. Now, I tell you this not because of the King family, but partly because of the Morehouse president. His name was John Hope. Yes, he's on your website. I'm sure many of you know that he began his studies here at Worcester Academy that month of our graduation in 2006. John Hope became the first African-American president of Morehouse College and a leader in the fight for equality. But those titles don't tell you the chances he took to get there, and they don't tell you something else. They don't tell you how unusual his headmaster was, Dr. Daniel Webster Abercrombie. He's not just someone whose name is on a plaque at Abercrombie House and whose picture hangs on my wall here. I say that as me, Mr. Sino, but he was someone with vision. He saw the promise in this young Black man at Worcester at a time when few good schools would educate African Americans, North or South. Daniel Abercrombie defied the customs of his time to see that John Hope got the education he deserved. So I'm here to tell you that you graduate not just from a fine school, but from one that's changed history. I'm here to tell you that, like John Hope, who was studying here all those years ago, what you learn here can help you change history too. And so I leave that with you to urge you forward in your own learning process, to urge you forward in your interests in shaping our world. And goodness knows we need you. We need all of you to be leaders in the future, and we need all of you to take our core values forward to achieve the honorable and to help bring us to a better place.
Ron, thank you so much for your thoughts. And thank you for that historical context as well within our own school and the legacy of civil rights, racial and social justice. And next, I'm going to turn the program over to Gaurav Savant, who's one of the co-leaders of SOG, the Southeast Asian Affinity Group, to say a few words on behalf of SOG.
As we reflect on the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and stand in solidarity with his work and his goals, we recognize the legacy of civil rights leaders, including Nelson Mandela and Dr. King, who embody the Gandhian principle of civil disobedience to disrupt injustice and demand change. We asked the Worcester Academy to consider the impact of one of the central tenets of civil disobedience, what Gandhi referred to as satyagraha, or the force that is generated by adherence to the truth.
Absolutely. Connection between Gandhi and King. And while they never met, they did have a camaraderie in their time and in the legacy. And I think the deeper legacy between them, something for us to consider for our own community today, is the legacy of love and empathy. And with that, I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you, Gaurav, for that segue. It's absolutely perfect. As I introduce our closing keynote speaker, Mr. Andre Bradford. Andre Bradford, AKA SC Says, is an Austin-based slam poet who's been performing slam poetry since 2013. He's toured and featured at venues and universities across the country, and his work has been featured in the Huffington Post, The Edge Radio, The Culture Trip, Right About Now, and Blavity. He is a 2-time Austin Poetry Slam champion, a 3-time Texas Grand Slam finalist, and is the creator and host of the Twitch channel, The Poetry Stream. He also once popped a bag of popcorn without burning a single kernel, which is arguably one of his greatest achievements. His poetry covers a gamut of topics, ranging from being mixed race to gun control, to mental health awareness, to never settling in relationships. Slam poetry is an art form he loves to do because of its raw vulnerability and its ability to cultivate transparency and dialogues into different walks of life. And with that, I turn it over to you. Thank you, Andre.
Thank you so much, Bonnie, for that introduction. Good morning, Worcester. My name is SC Says. I am a slam poet coming to y'all from Austin, Texas, the breakfast taco capital of the world. You can literally Google that. I'm really excited to be here. And for those of you who are a little less familiar, slam poetry is typically a very interactive art form, meaning throughout this next little bit, you're going to hear some slam poems, surprise. And during those poems, if you hear something that really resonates with you, that connects with you, kind of hits you somewhere in your chest, you can literally snap, you can clap, you can flood the chat with the word snap or just some lines that really resonated with you. That feeds me a lot of energy and it makes this whole thing a lot better. So like I said, I'm in Austin, and in Austin, we have a motto, which is keep Austin weird. Now, I'm already pretty weird. I am a Jamaican and Mexican. I am a Jamexican. I may be the only one you ever meet in your lives, so savor this moment. I grew up in a non-culturally diverse neighborhood in Grand Prairie, Texas. That is the literal name of the town I grew up in. That was weird. I love heavy metal and folk music, so if you can shred on a guitar, that is awesome. But if you can shred on a ukulele, man, that has been getting me through quarantine. Also kind of weird. I cry at animated movies consistently. I'm not sure if that's weird, if there's like a deeper issue there. So yeah, I would definitely classify myself as kind of weird. But I think the weirdest thing for me growing up was figuring out how to be Black. That was weird. Because for those of you who are, they don't give you a manual when you're born that's like, follow these steps and you'll be Black. You just kind of have to figure it out as you go. And like I said, I grew up in a non-culturally diverse neighborhood. So when I was like 7 or 8, I had no idea I was Black because I don't know. You just don't notice things like that when you're that age. But as I got older, little things started to happen that kind of clued me in that I wasn't quite like everybody else. So my first poem is actually about what that experience was like for me. It's called Crayon Box. L'Oreal now has a makeup that takes the guesswork out of finding your perfect shade of foundation. Well, L'Oreal, it took you long enough, didn't it? Where the hell was this when I was in elementary school? Or hey, I'd settled for junior high. All those mornings, I had to look in a mirror and see a skin tone that didn't quite match my foundation of friends. This would have come in handy, finally. A product that lets me feel comfortable in my own skin. I mean, doctors can practically grow you another chin now, and it's been 30 years since my sojourn began. I know, I didn't wear makeup back then, but if I'd been exposed to this miracle product beforehand, imagine all the friendships I could have saved. My childhood consisted of a color palette composed mostly of a lighter pigment than my own, and if our life's painting only consists of the colors of people we put in it, my painting looked a lot like a newspaper lacking content. And as the only sentence on the page, it wasn't hard to stand out, so I tried to blend in, tried not to attract attention for fear of being mentioned. I changed the way that I dressed to seem less confrontational, changed the way I spoke to seem more agreeable, changed the way I breathed. So it was not to be too audible, but I couldn't change my flesh, no matter how bad I wanted to. And I began to notice that I was always the Black friend my friends' parents were referring to. Notice that it wasn't necessarily me girls didn't find attractive, but the skin I was dressed in. Notice that being mixed and being Black weighs just as heavily on the suburban scale of normality. And I'll admit, it took me a long time to realize what they meant when they asked me, "What are you?" As if my overall classification of human being wasn't quite registering on their one of us radar. And I was lucky because I had friends who didn't seem to notice me struggling to be like them. But the environment I was in never let me forget that I was the exception, not the rule. What if, as children, we were forced to grow up in a school as colorful as our crayon boxes? Imagine how beautiful the stories we painted together would be if we began to see unique and beauty as synonyms and not commodities we can exploit to sell stories. If the sentences, "she's pretty" for an Indian girl, or "he's smart" for a Mexican, or "he's tall" for an Asian guy could exist without a qualifier attached to them. She's pretty, he's smart, he's just really tall, period. Color only matters to people who are afraid that one day theirs might not. And I've been afraid most of my life of offending those people with my existence, but I'm developing a resistance, a new set of eyes that sees beauty in the abnormalities. I'm writing stories that tell of colors the first cameras couldn't quite capture, full of characters so diverse in complexion, you'd have a hard time finding similarities in anything but our laughter. So I'm sorry, L'Oreal, you're a little too late. You see, I no longer need a cream in a bottle to help me blend in. I'm a little too busy trying to stand out. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm loving all of this energy that y'all are pouring into the chat right now. This is awesome. Thank you. So something happened there, though, that I really want to highlight. I let you all into a little bit of my life story. And in doing so, I connected with you on a much deeper level than if we just met on the street somewhere and said, "Hey." I mean, you now all on this Zoom call know things about me some of my family doesn't know. It's a big reason I love this art form. It allows the audience a quick peek into what makes someone truly tick. And based on your reactions, your snaps, your claps, the things that you throw in the chat, I get to see that some of the hard stuff that I went through, some of the circumstances that I had to overcome resonates with some of you as well. That is literally how human connection happens. We just share our stories. Something about hearing another human being have the same hurts, the same struggles, or maybe even the same goals, same desires, draws us closer to that person. We start to develop these strong emotions like trust, appreciation, maybe even love. And these emotions are what help us develop the connections we need with the people around us to help us get through life. Now, throughout this next little bit, we're going to go on a kind of roller coaster of emotions. And I really want to encourage you to go on this ride with me, because these are emotions you're going to want to identify and recreate in your own everyday experiences so you can develop the connections you need to get through life. We're all living at this really interesting time right now where technology is perhaps more important than it's ever been. Actually, Apple recently announced an application on their latest iOS update that allows you to translate language in real time without an internet connection. That is amazing. Google's had this for years, but I'm really excited to have this now. I've always really wanted to go to Japan because I'm a huge anime fan. Another weird fact about me. And pretty soon I'm going to be able to go to Japan, talk just like I am talking right now, and have it be understood in the native tongue. That is amazing. I mean, that has the potential to bridge oceans, to bring cultures together. And thanks to technology, it is now easier than ever to distance ourselves from people or things we don't like or agree with a simple swipe or click. We can say things online we wouldn't ordinarily say to someone to their face. Our social media apps, our Twitters, our TikToks, our Snapchats, our Facebooks, our Instagrams are literally designed. The algorithms that run these applications are designed to only show you the things that you already like, already agree with, or things that aren't too far away from the things that you already like or agree with. And what's been happening over the last 10 years is we've all started to develop these huge invisible walls. And on one side of the wall is all the things that we like and agree with. And it's really awesome on this side of the wall. And on the other side of the wall, we have no idea, because our news feeds, our social media apps stopped showing us that stuff a long time ago. And we're starting to develop this huge divide from all the people who think different than us, look different than us, vote different than us. Now, a theme that we're going to look at a lot in this next little bit is empathy. And empathy is just the ability to feel what other people are feeling, to share in those emotions. Empathy, I think, is one of the most powerful tools we have right now at our disposal to change the world around us. But it's really hard to have empathy for somebody if you don't take the time to hear any of their story, if you don't try to piece together some of the why of them. And if you do that long enough, you can start to have some pretty interesting interactions. And I want to give you an example of one from my life, because I'm not perfect. This next poem is about a bad day that I had and a person that I met in the midst of that. It's called A Kindness. It's been a long day. The kind of day where my motivation and procrastination couldn't decide which of the two looked better on me, so they dressed me in mediocrity and sent me on my way. On my way to a day where none of my childhood dreams came true, a day even Dr. Seuss probably would have rhymed with suckish, where the most exciting thing that happened to me was that my gas light came on, and to top it all off, I am stuck in line at my least favorite place, Walgreens. I hate Walgreens. Got me all excited about their membership, then elected to price their products so high. The membership only served to bring them back down to reality. It is killing me. They call 35 cents off of greediness a bargain. And this hag in front of me is pulling out a checkbook. Lady, I am sure the 1930s were a swell time, but some things are not better the old-fashioned way, and her hands shake as she pays for her gallon of water, 6 bananas, loaf of bread, jar of peanut butter, apple granola bars, 4 bottles of Gatorade, 2 Hershey's chocolate bars, because why the hell not, 3 packs of spearmint gum, and the chocolate cakes from Hostess. And I only know this because in the time it took for her to find that checkbook in that suitcase on her arm, they put a man on Neptune. And brilliant. She forgot the milk. And as we all wait for the store associate to run and grab her calcium liquid, I begin to associate this old woman with purgatory. This must be the stuck behind the arthritic old lady at the grocery store level. And I am sure for some, this level isn't that bad. But it's been a long day. And this woman smells like old people. I'm beginning to wonder how she escaped from the nursing home. But right before I can ask this fossil what the Great Depression was like, mercifully, the associate returns with her 1%. The cash register dings and opens. It's over. At least I didn't kill an old woman today. She collects her belongings and, at a speed evolution would respect, moves so slowly to the door that I can scan my item, pay for it, grab my card and receipt, go to leave, and she is just now reaching the front doors, where she's conveniently blocking the only exit. Old lady, you picked the wrong day to examine my morality. I surge to give her a sharp push into the portrait frame of my day, but I miss. Because she's tricked me into surprisingly swift as she makes her sharp right. And as I stumble through the door, I struggle to regain composure as my mind works to clarify the scenario I am seeing. I pause as my day's largest mountain kneels down, and the burden she carries is unloaded on the homeless man laying down at the front of the store with a sign that reads, "You are loved," a gallon of water, 6 bananas, a loaf of bread, jar of peanut butter, apple granola bars, 4 bottles of Gatorade, 2 Hershey's chocolate bars, because why the hell not? 3 packs of spearmint gum and those chocolate cakes from Hostess, and of course, the 1% milk almost forgotten as she empties every item in her bag for the first time today. My mind is quiet as I bear witness to a development. This is what love looks like. With a smile and a wave, she says goodbye to the man who probably never know the name of the whisper of humanity on 2 legs walking away, but she turns back to procure her original purpose. I stop her and ask her who she is. And with a smile, like a vaccine curing my melancholy disease, she says to me, "I'm Ingrid. Ingrid, thank you for making this day beautiful. Thank you." Thank y'all. Thank you for the energy. I'm loving this in the chat right now. I love telling that story, mainly because it makes me look really, really bad. And we never like to do that. We never like to talk about our flaws, even though subconsciously we all know we all have these like chips, these sort of cracks in our making. Me personally, I'm incredibly impatient. I know that about myself. I'm also not above pushing old ladies out of the way. You should know that about me. I'm joking, mostly. But another reason I share that piece is it's a pretty good example of a time in my own life where I made a snap judgment about somebody. I mean, here's this older woman, Ingrid, at a Walgreens, and I am thinking she doesn't understand new technology. She does not care about other people's time. And after learning just a little bit about the kind of person that Ingrid was, my entire view of her changed. I think one of the beautiful things about empathy is that as human beings, we don't have to have gone through the exact same experience to be able to imagine what similar circumstances would be like for you, how you would handle it. That's why I can share that poem with you, and you can imagine being in a hurry or being anxious or the shock you might feel after learning something new about someone that forces you to completely change the way that you see them. And that can happen after learning just a little bit about someone's story. So something I really love is the Zulu word for hello, which is sawubona. And sawubona translates to, in English, I see you. I see you. I love that. I think we should always use that. I see you. Because when you boil it down, that is basically all we desire as human beings, to be seen, to be acknowledged, to exist. And I know for me, that is something I have struggled with a lot in my life. And maybe for you, that seems like a really small thing right now, just to be acknowledged. But over time, if you don't have that, you start to develop these feelings of emptiness, of disregard, of neglect. And what you're really battling with there is a lack of empathy. And if that keeps happening to you, the results could be really, really disastrous. So I've been performing slam poetry for 7 years now, and I'm kind of finding that I feel most motivated in kind of like these 2 camps. I get motivated to write about stuff that really kind of forces me to consider my perspective on something or really inspires me. And actually, something that really inspired me recently was after Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, there were people that came from all over the country to help. I was actually at a gas station in Austin right after that happened, and there was this truck that came in towing this boat. And on this boat was painted this sign that said, "Don't worry, Houston, Louisiana's coming." And I thought that was awesome because that's at least a 2.5-hour drive. So these people woke up, hitched up their boat, drove 2.5 hours at least to go help out some strangers. I love that. I love stories like that. But it also made me kind of think of how we usually only hear stories like that after a major disaster is struck, after people's lives are in danger. And it made me kind of worried about what our world is going to look like, what our country is going to look like if we keep finding it harder and harder to show the people around us empathy. I was given some advice once that, son, any place within walking distance if you have the time. And I've been wondering lately, when was the last time we looked at a map instead of an article? Did you know that the US is only covered by 7% of water, meaning our country is 93% within reach, depending on the bridges we are willing to manifest destiny with open palms instead of closed minds? It is amazing the walls a natural disaster can break. The political party lines get stepped over when you recognize that another human being is another human being. And I've heard solid arguments make for crappy boats. Can't keep someone from drowning while you're busy gerrymandering your way into obsolete. Maybe Hurricane Harvey knew we would only stop pointing fingers if we had to use all of them to keep from sinking. Keep an entire city from becoming a story of if only we had a warning fact. Before an earthquake hits, there are tremors. Before a tornado strikes, there are certain conditions that must be met. Before a hurricane is given a name, we can plot its trajectory. So if we tear ourselves to pieces, do not tell me there weren't any warning signs. A mosque burning leaves a scent. A deported family leaves a bitter taste. A colored body made unwilling hashtag leaves a trail. One you can follow all over this country, and we are one intentional natural disaster away from becoming a Stephen King novel. When actually having a dialogue becomes a novelty, you can start to hear our countdown clock ticking, and no one seems to know how to tell time anymore. Did you know it took 4 years and 5 months to build the Golden State Bridge? 11 men died during its construction. We don't honor their names, but every day, 40,000 people benefit from the work they did. You do not build a bridge by asking the materials where they are really from, by questioning if the blueprint is Democrat or Republican, by mapping distances in terms of which portion of water paid the most taxes. You build a bridge by figuring out where you want to go, finding the safest way to get as many people there as possible by putting in the work to find where 2 points can come together. When I was in high school, someone wrote "nigger lover" on my girlfriend's car. I say someone, but I knew who she was. She was actually the first girl I ever French kissed. Guess I just didn't do it right. A couple years ago, she sent me a friend request and I accepted it, not because I'd forgotten what she did, but because it was clear to me she was asking to build a bridge. And bridges that cover any meaningful distance are rarely built from one side. I am inspired by the men and women who came to a city literally underwater and didn't just see another Instagram opportunity. I hope the next time we can come together, it isn't because we're trying to keep people from dying. There will always be another hurricane. But if we're not careful, it may arrive to find a people that destroyed themselves. An unnatural disaster we saw coming for years. Thank you. So I've had several kind of racist things happen to me in my life, but the writing on my girlfriend's car was definitely the hardest one for me to get over. I legitimately believed growing up that racism was just a thing you read about in textbooks. Could never happen nowadays. So when it did, my entire view of myself and the world shattered. And it took me years to be able to pull myself back together again. Now, the name of this show is Kintsukuroi, and Kintsukuroi is a Japanese art form in which you take a piece of pottery that's been broken and you mend it back together. And the glue that you use is a golden metallic lacquer, so that the finished piece is arguably more beautiful after it was broken than it was in the first place. Now, obviously, I'm a poet. I appreciate the metaphor there. But if you think about it, that is why we love our Hollywood stories. Our underdog stories where the hero is broken down, beaten, defeated, but somehow, despite all odds, they're able to pull themselves back up, go out there, win an a cappella championship, and all of Anna Kendrick's dreams come true. I always do a Pitch Perfect plug in my shows. It's a really, really good movie. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend. But if you sort of extrapolate this idea of Kintsukuroi to the world around us, I think it's pretty obvious there's a lot of brokenness out there. Racism, poverty, sexism, the stigmas around mental health, mass shootings, the assaults on our nation's capital literally a week ago. And I believe that empathy is the golden lacquer we need to start mending our pieces back together again to hopefully make something beautiful out of it. Now, the other side of empathy is allowing people to show it to you, which requires you to talk about your chips, your cracks, some of the pain that you carry, some of the hurt that you harbor so that you can begin to mend. And we all have these things, right? I'm no exception. In fact, this was something I struggled with a lot before slam poetry. I never wanted anyone to see my mistakes, my pain, my hurt. I didn't want people to think that, I don't know, I couldn't handle my life in some way. And what really changed that for me was after the first time I performed my crayon box poem at the Austin Poetry Slam, a girl came up to me afterwards and she was just bawling. And she said 3 words to me that I will never forget. Write better poems. No, that's not what she said. That would have sucked. This would have been a totally different show if that's what she said. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and she said, "You get it. You get it." I had never met this girl, but I connected with her on such a deep level after sharing just 3 minutes of my story in a way that I might not have after knowing her for 3 years. And just by looking at her, I would have never guessed that she'd gone through similar circumstances. But by her doing that, she showed me empathy, and some of that brokenness in me started to heal. I truly believe that if we take the time to hear the stories of the people around us, we will genuinely be surprised at the commonalities we find. It is so easy today to swipe through people's moments in stories or watch a documentary or read an article and think you know somebody, but you miss so much about what makes someone human and beautiful by doing that. I think one of the best ways that we can practice empathy is getting past this initial reaction we have or this initial opinion we build about someone without ever really trying to take the time to get to know them. So I have an ask of you, Worcester, and that is to show the people around you empathy. And you can do that in 3 really, really simple ways. The first is to pay attention. You are going to interact with so many people at your time with Worcester and afterwards. And a lot of the times when you ask people how they're doing, they're going to tell you they're fine. They're okay. They're good. When sometimes you can tell that they're not. And especially for the people in your life that you care about, it is so important to get past that first barrier. And a good way that I have found to do that is to always ask twice. First, it shows you genuinely want to know the answer to that question. And second, it forces them to rewrite the script they have in their head that keeps us all having these really surface level conversations and actually talk about what's going on in our lives. My buddy Esteban is a comedian out in LA, and he has this really hilarious bit about how we're all basically just 2 how are yous from a breakdown. Like, has this ever happened to you? You're just like chilling at a coffee shop somewhere, minding your own business, and like someone you vaguely know comes up to you and they're like, "Hey, how you doing?" You're like, "Oh, I'm fine." And they're like, No, but like, how you doing now? And like all of a sudden you're just bawling in a coffee shop. Just me? That's okay. I think that's so true of us. We walk around with these gigantic walls all the time. And it usually just takes one person, one time, showing a genuine interest in our lives for those walls to come down and for you to build a genuine connection with someone. 2, be willing to let other people show empathy to you by telling your story, your full story, not just the Instagram, TikTok highlight reel of your life, but some of the hard stuff, some of the heavy stuff, some of the pain, so that you can begin to build the connections you need to get through life. 3, don't abstain the differences, appreciate them. How life comes at you and how you handle it is going to look different for every single person on this Zoom call. It's part of what makes life interesting. And it's important to recognize that every single thing that has happened to you in your life experience is going to be different from the person next to you. And even if the person across from you couldn't seem more different, I promise you, you have something in common with them. We've all had bad days. We've all had good days. We've all been hurt. We've all missed someone. We've all laughed at cats that can't get out of boxes. We're not that different. Worcester, my name is, as he says, thank you so much for letting me share some of my story with you. I really appreciate this. I encourage you to really consider the legacy of MLK and where we stand at this moment in time in history, you have an important endeavor in front of you, and that is to start to recognize the humanity in the people around you and show the people around you more empathy. I just want to close out with this final thought. If you want to change the world around you, start by trying to understand the people in it. Thank you.
Andre, thank you so much for that presentation. I know I got goosebumps several times during it, and I think you told some real truths there. So we're very grateful to meet you over this medium. We wish we could invite you to campus, and hopefully in the future, maybe you can come visit us in Worcester rather than do it on Zoom. But thank you again. And thank you to Mrs. Walker and to Gaurav and to Mr. Sino for their part of this program as well. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have this. So thank you.